Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I have some things that may interest you. The article in the Inquirer, the history of the 325 glider infantry, and the glidermen of Neptune. Some of you don't know what that is, but that was the overlord that was assigned to the gliders on D-Day. Actually, I was asked to mention the ASTP program, and I guess I should get into that first. When I enlisted, I was still in high school. I was president of the graduating class of Woodrow Wilson High in Camden and graduated in June of '43. But I enlisted in April, so that with the understanding that the Army would keep their word and wouldn't call me up until at least I graduated. And for the only time probably that happened, they did wait, and it was right after June the 15th that I was called into active service. The government was very nice. They gave me $1.75 to take a bus to Fort Dix. When I got to Fort Dix, after they cut my hair, and I sat through the battery of tests, they said, "You're smart enough, we're going to send you to college." I thought, that's great. My father didn't work 7 years during the Depression. I'm all for that. But first you have to take an infantry basic. I said, I'll go along with that too. They sent me to Fort Benning, Georgia, where I took the same training that the paratroops took, except for the jumps. And they put me in what was called...
Please call extension 15.
They put me
Fred Foley, please call extension 15.
Put me in what was called the ASTP program, or the Army Specialized Training Program. Now, I had no idea what that was, but they said, don't worry about it, we're going to send you to college. I went to Fort Benning, went through the 15 weeks of 16-week infantry basic that the paratroopers take, and in the 15th week they said to me, we've abolished the ASTP program, and since you have had an infantry basic and you only have one more week to go, we're going to assign you to an infantry outfit. They didn't say airborne, they didn't say anything, but they sent me up to Boston, and I shipped out overseas, went to Liverpool, stayed overnight, got into a train the next morning, got off the train, got in a truck, and I was the first one to jump out. And this young, tall, thin paratroop lieutenant said, "Congratulations, you just made your first jump." And I looked at him and I said, "That's a volunteer outfit." He said, "I heard you volunteer on the way down from the truck." So I was then sent to a place called Scraptop in England. And fortunately for me, it was not a parachute outfit, it was a glider infantry outfit. And the training wasn't that bad, except that I did make 3 jumps in England while we were training for D-Day. And 2 years ago, when the state of New Jersey finally said I had to retire as a judge, they gave me a dinner, and for those 3 jumps, someone was there from Fort Benning to award me my parachute wings as well as the glider wings that I had gotten for the 3 jumps, because normally you need 5 jumps to qualify for a parachute. But in any event, we were sent into Scraptop, where we began training for the invasion. And for some of you who still think that D-Day is June 6th, let me tell you that some of the 101st and some of the 82nd went in at 11 o'clock on June the 5th. It was pitch black, and they were the pathfinders. They were the ones who were supposed to find where we were supposed to land, but they were in on the invasion on June 5th at 11 o'clock at night. Our gliders arrived probably at 3 o'clock in the morning. And our object, we landed near St. Mary-Gallice, which happens to be the first French town that was liberated on D-Day. The American flag was hoisted over City Hall at 4 o'clock on the morning of June 6th. The beaches were starting at 6:30. But we, 10 miles inland, had taken over the town of St. Mary-Gallice, and our job was to keep the German reserves from getting up to the bridges, or the beaches rather, and we were successful in doing that. The Germans were not ready for us inland. My first experience was with a young French lady in the hedgerows who came out screaming, cussing us in French, but in English too, telling us that we destroyed her house and her wedding dress, and she was going to get married that day. And she was screaming at the top of her lungs. And I said, if you don't shut up, I'm going to kill you. And she fortunately shut up. Unfortunately, we found a trooper who was hanging in the trees, had a broken neck. There was no blood on his uniform. He was short and small. And she got married on D-Day in an American paratrooper's uniform and boots, because we destroyed the whole house that morning. And she, for years, came to visit us at our reunions of the 325th Glider Infantry. Came with her husband initially, and after he died, she came to visit us and thank us, and thank me in particular for not shooting her that morning for screaming so loud. But we went into D-Day for 3 to 7 days. Airborne troops, in case not all of you sitting back there are airborne, are not replaced in the line like regular infantry. If regular infantry people are killed or wounded, they're taken out, and at night they bring in people who may be killed before the next day and nobody ever knew where they were. In the airborne troops, you don't get replacements. If you lose a man or a squad, you're that much short. You still have your objective to do, and you do what you can. And we went in there for 33 days instead of 3 to 7 before we were relieved and sent back to Scraptoff in England, which is a little village just outside of Leicester, where we were training. In the introduction, he said, I went from Normandy to Belgium. In between, on September the 17th, was a little engagement called the Invasion of Holland. And we went in there on September the 17th for 7 to 10 days and came out in '64 without replacements. When we came out, we were decimated. We were sent back to a place called Sissonne, France, which is just outside of Reims. And there we were supposed to get replacements, but soldiers being soldiers, on Sunday night we were watching a girly show that the General Gavin had brought in from Paris. And this major came out, interrupted the show, got all the boos and catcalls from the privates and sergeants that were sitting out there for interrupting the show, and said, the show's over, return to your tents, get your weapons, we're going up. The Germans broke through in the Bulge. And we finally got sent up in the Bulge without replacements. We never got any after Holland. We went up with half a company and got to a place aptly named in Belgium called Mayhem. And from Mayhem, my company was sent to a crossroads with about half a company. We went up there with less than 70 men. We got up there on the 19th, completely surrounded, because to get there, they walked us down the stream for 7 or 8 hours with the water from ankle to knee deep. All that nice snow on the ground and all that nice water going in your boots and shoes. But we got on the crossroads on the 19th and held out until December the 23rd, when two things happened. First thing was, as I'm firing my machine gun, I see this barrel coming out of the woods, and it just kept coming and just coming. And if you ever saw an 88 on a tank, you knew what was coming after that. And there were six of the tanks coming out of the woods. And my second gunner, whom I unfortunately went to West Virginia to bury last year, said to me, "Matt, I'm too scared to stay." I said, "Sam, I'm too scared to run." I said, "But I'll use what ammunition I have left, because all the ammunition we had is what we took up on the crossroads, carrying it ourselves." I said, "I'll use what I have left and help you get off the crossroad." He ran like a scared rabbit and got the Silver Star for getting off that crossroad. He was one of the few that got off. The day before, our captain left us and said, "I'm going to go get help. I'll take a few wounded and go get you some help. But hold this crossroads at all cost." Well, the all cost was we ran out of ammunition. I could see my 30 caliber bullets, every fifth one was a tracer in the belt, and they were hitting the tanks and bouncing off like raindrops in the different areas. They weren't doing a thing, and the German infantry was behind them. And then they came out and they did what I considered a very nasty thing. We were in slit trenches. You couldn't dig a foxhole because there was a couple inches of ice and snow and you couldn't get down there. So we had a slit trench, and the tanks came out and they began to squish the men, squish them. And they turned their tank treads on the men that were in their slit trenches and squashed them. And I guess I was the ranking person left. I said to the other 8 who were left on that crossroad, "How do you want to die? You want to get squished or you want to get shot?" And they all said, "Let's get it over with, let's get shot." So the 9 of us gave up, thought we were going to be shot immediately, and the Germans did go around and hit everybody that was on the ground or kick them if they were of a want to do that. And if anybody moaned or groaned, they were shot in the head. Fortunately for me and for the other 8, they decided to interrogate us. And I spent that night in the castle, in the dungeon in the basement, being interrogated, and the German officer spoke perfect English. He asked names, and you answer Matthew W. Parks, 12/21/1879. I bet all of you remember that serial number yet. And he said, "Your captain was Captain Woodruff, and he took off a couple days ago to get help." And he knew more about the company than I knew about the company. And I just sat there and listened to him talk. And from there, they walked us into Germany, and with all due respects to the Air Force, I do not know how the Germans got so damn much equipment in that place without being detected. Because as I walked through, there were tanks, there were trucks being pulled by horses, all heading up into the bulge for the Germans, and what a buildup they had. And we walked for a couple days through that buildup to parts of Germany. I walked through the streets of Cologne as a prisoner. One of the other prisoners who was not part of our group bent over and saw a rag in the rubble, picked it up, used it to blow his nose, and got shot for looting. They finally put us in some of the 40 and 8 boxcars. What you've heard on television is the truth. They put you in boxcars shoulder to shoulder and squeezed. You couldn't bend, you couldn't do anything. If you had to go to the bathroom, you went. There was nothing you could do about it. When they finally stopped at Stalag 12A, which is outside of Limburg, Germany, and began to let us out, 3 men dropped dead. They were dead. Nobody knew how long they were dead. It was just that the guy that was holding them up with his shoulder had moved away, and he had a chance, or they had a chance to fall on the floor because there was no heat in that boxcar except the body heat from the man next to you. And as I say, only 3 were dead. They put 200 of us in one building that had one toilet that was stopped up and didn't work, and 200 men with dysentery. And I want to tell you, that was a bad night. They fortunately gave us a shower the next morning, but you couldn't wash your clothes, just your body. And I was one of the fortunate ones. They didn't like the paratrooper uniform, airborne uniform anyhow, and they wanted us out of the place. And they took some of the Air Force men, and they didn't like their uniforms, and neither did the population, because as soon as they saw the Air Force, they were hitting us with the rubble that the Air Force left. The stones from the bombings that they had were thrown at everybody that had the Air Force uniform or the jump uniform or whatever we had. And for the next 4.5 months, 23 of us were in a work detail above Berlin near the North Sea. We were gotten up for work in the morning by either a foot in the fanny or a blow of a rifle butt, whichever way they felt like waking us up that morning. Our breakfast consisted of coffee, ersatz coffee, or ersatz tea. Ersatz is a German word. It means it's phony coffee, phony tea, but it's hot. You got a cup of that in the morning. If you had coffee in the morning, you got tea at night. If you had tea in the morning, you got coffee at night. They changed your diet completely, except for lunch. Lunch was no change. It was a dipper of what they called kartoffel soup, potato soup made out of the peels that the guards ate. We got the peelings, and they boiled them. It was more hot water than peels, but whatever it was good. On Sunday night, we got a 1/2 inch of brown or black bread, a 1/2 inch of cheese, and a 1/2 inch of cold cut of some kind. German bologna, German salami, and that was the last, that 1/2 inch was to last the whole week. It was such a good diet, they'd be having it on television today because I lost 66 pounds. I went from 178 pounds to 112 pounds in that 4.5 months. Finally, we could hear, and I'll get back to the war and what you have, but they asked me to bring a tape that was given to me when I finally retired from the judicial bench in New Jersey 2 years ago. They had made a tape that somebody called me, asked me questions, I answered the questions. They cut his questions out, they used my answers, and then they made this tape that you're about to see. And we'll show that and then we'll get into it. But in any event, we took off from the camp we had convinced the guards, first of all, that they would be better off as American prisoners than Russian prisoners, because at that time we could hear the Russian guns and the explosions from their artillery that was coming in. And it didn't take too much convincing to convince them. They wanted to know why, and we explained to them we wanted them to guard us as we went through German towns. We took their all their weapons and all their ammunition, gave them back their rifles with no ammunition. I carried one of the pistols, some of the other men carried pistols, and they did just that. They walked us through German towns, and we were hit with the rubble that the Air Force had left for the people. They were throwing rocks, and the German guards were trying to keep them away from us, and they found us a barn to sleep in at night. And we finally reached the American lines, the American 8th Division, if there's anybody here on the Russian side of the Elbe. On May 4th, finally got a shower, finally got my underwear changed after 4.5, 5 months of dysentery and whatever you want. My socks looked like baseball socks. The toes were out, the heels were out, and there was a little strap underneath that handled that, but my jump boots were in good shape, I have to. While I was in there getting a hot shower, after they had sprayed me with DDT, somebody stole my jump boots. If I'd have found him, I'd have shot him too. But in any event, May 4th, we hit American lines. May 8th, the war was over. And then, I wasn't 20 yet, I came down with the measles. I was sent to Camp Lucky Strike, first to put some weight back on me, and then to treat me for the measles. And then they sent me to Le Havre, France, and I'm going up the gangplank, and there's a lieutenant there, and he says, Parks, and you answer, Matthew W., 12/21/1879. He said, what's wrong with you, soldier? I said, not a thing, sir. He said, yes, there is. Stand over there. I said, oh, God. I stood over there. He brings a doctor. Doctor says, you got the measles. I said, well, let me get on a ship. He said, no, you'll infect the ship back to Lucky Strike. So I went back to Camp Lucky Strike to an isolation ward in the hospital. Now, if you've ever been at a field army hospital, isolation ward are cots with sheets between them. So I picked up the sheet and I said, hi, I'm Matt Parks, who are you? He introduced himself. He had the mumps. So the doctor came in and he says, you're over the measles. I said, great, can I go home? He said, absolutely. Back to Le Havre, back to the line, and I could feel this side of my face swelling. So I switched my duffel bag to this side. And he hollered Parks, and I said, Matthew W., 12/21/1879. He told me what deck I was supposed to go to. I went on board, stayed up top until they got out in the ocean. It was a Liberty ship. When I finally reported that I didn't feel well, the doctor on board said, you have the mumps. He said, I don't have an isolation ward. I said, keep going. The only cabin that they had was the colonel of the troops. They threw him out, and I had his stateroom and somebody to wait on me for the 14 days that it took that Liberty ship to come back here to get over the mumps. And it was probably the best cruise I ever had. And then we finally landed in Norfolk, Virginia, which is in the news today because they're sending the ships out to ride out this hurricane. But in any event, the people that greet us as we're coming off are German prisoners in clean uniforms, pressed with a nice PW printed on it, and they're carrying our luggage off like we're celebrities coming in. And I cussed out a few of them, and finally got home and had some time in R&R, and as this gentleman said in introducing me, I turned 20 in July. I was discharged in the 19th of November of 1945, just over 20. I had lived a lifetime in that period of time, but I was glad to get home. But I fooled the Army. Uncle Sam said they were going to send me to college. Well, Uncle Sam did in a different way. all GIs who were discharged were entitled to go to college, and Uncle Sam would pay for it. I went to college. I went first to Penn, and I haven't liked Penn since. I went in there, got in this nice plush office with walnut panels and huge desk, and everything's beautiful. And the chancellor at the time is interviewing me, and he's talking to me, and all the small talk got through, and he said to me, "Tell me, Mr. Parks, how many of your family graduated from Penn?" I looked at him, I said, "I'm the first one to graduate high school." He said, "Oh, thank you very much, the interview's over." And then I called him a few choice names and left and walked across town to Temple and spent 7 years in Temple, 4 years in undergrad, 3 years in law school. Never regretted it a bit. Got a perfect education. Didn't have to say I came from Penn, and I've hated Penn since that day. And for that reason, I wasn't good enough for them to go to college there. I was to get shot at in Normandy, in Holland, in Belgium. On my discharge, I have credit for 5 major battles or 1 Silver Star. The Bronze Star I got for, I guess, surviving the crossroads with the other 8 men. Although, as I say, my second gunner, who I buried last year, got a Silver Star because he got back up that stream and got away, got back to American lines, and lived to fight on through Berlin. Now, I can go through the battles, but when I retired from the bench, and again, that was forcibly, you can't get rid of me. And this gentleman asked me, "How long are you going to talk?" I said, "I'm a lawyer. I don't run out of words." And then I sat on the bench and I told them, well, I had to be quiet while they were talking, but in any event, when I retired from the bench 2 years ago, because the state of New Jersey passed a new law that said all judges who are over 70, and I was 76 at the time, and who have been on the bench for more than 10 years, and I sure devil had been on the bench more, must retire the first day of the next calendar month, and that law was passed December 15th, and I had to retire January the 1st, 2 years ago. There was no choice. I had to go back on my vacation, clean out the accumulation of 15 years of junk that you accumulate while I was on the bench. But is this ready, Brandon? I'll let you look at this. I have available here some stuff, the history of the 325 glider, and the 325 is still in existence today, except it's no longer a GIR, it's a PIR. They did away with gliders in about 1948. The 101st, which was all paratroopers at the time, and still have jump training, are now air assault. But the 82nd is still the 82nd Airborne, all of them, the paratroopers. The 325 is a parachute infantry unit, and I'll leave these up here if anybody wants to look at them after the picture, and I'll answer any questions that you may have on this. The one behind me to the left is the one I buried last year. While he's fixing this, I'll tell you the story. I got a telephone call from a fella in California, and he said, "I'm going to ask you some questions, just keep your answers brief." And he did, and I did, and then when I retired from being a judge, they presented me with this document, which is me narrating what I had been through. I don't know.
Many years ago, in the middle of the 20th century, America asked a young man to go to war. It was the time of the Second World War. The United States was engaged in World War II from December 7th, 1941 until August of 1945. It was a conflict which left few places on earth untouched. It was fought on all the oceans, in all the skies, on tropical islands and in ancient cities. When that young man went off to war, he left his home, his family, his school, his job. He didn't know it at the time, perhaps, but this ordinary, everyday American and millions like him were being asked to save the world. Whether he was on the front line or the supply line, that young soldier helped us triumph in Europe. He helped to liberate conquered nations and bring an end to the terrible fighting. I'm Walter Cronkite. I believe we owe this soldier, your family's World War II veteran, an enormous debt of gratitude. We should never forget his courage, his sense of duty, his sacrifice. His contributions made possible the freedoms and life we all too often take for granted. I was a correspondent during that war. Despite all that's happened since then, nothing has made a bigger impression on me than the willingness of those young American soldiers to go beyond the call to duty. Because of their determination, America itself was changed, and the world as we know it today was born. I consider it a great honor to introduce the story your veteran will tell of his contribution to America's role in World War II. It's his story, told by him in his words, and it's a part of American history. Listen to this story and remember it. He's dedicating it to you, his family, and to all his descendants. This is the best part of our nation's heritage. It's real. It's the story of one veteran, one of those everyday heroes who saved the world. Honor him, as I do.
My name is Matthew W. Parks. During World War II, I was a PFC in Company F of 2nd Battalion of the 325th Glider Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne Division. I was born and raised in Camden, New Jersey, and on the day of Pearl Harbor, I was a sophomore in high school at Woodrow Wilson High School when war was declared in April of 1943. While still in high school, I enlisted in the Army with the understanding that they would not call me up until after graduation in June of 1943, since I was the president of the graduating class. After I graduated, I received notice to report to Fort Dix in New Jersey in August 1943. And after reporting and taking a series of tests, I was advised that the Army was placing me in what was then called the Army Specialized Training Program, or ASTP, and that I would be sent to college. But first, I would have to take an infantry basic. I was then sent to Fort Benning, Georgia, the home of the parachute training group, and began a 16-week infantry basic, which was the same as the volunteer paratroopers were taking, with the exception that we did not jump. During the 15th week of the 16-week basic, the captain advised us that the government had abolished the ASTP program, and since we had infantry basic, we were going to be assigned to an infantry unit. Accordingly, in probably February or March, I I was sent to Texas, where I joined the 103rd Infantry Division. I was only there a short time when I was shipped out by train to Fort Miles Standish in Massachusetts and shipped out of Boston overseas. I arrived in Liverpool, England in late April, early May of 1944. Stayed the first night in what was called a Reppeldepel, and then the next morning a group of us were placed on a train. After the train stopped, we were placed in trucks, and when the truck stopped, I was the first one to jump out of the back of our truck, and there stood a young paratroop lieutenant who said, "Congratulations, you just made your first jump." At that time, however, to be a paratrooper, you had to volunteer, and apparently staff knew more than we knew, and all of us were assigned to the 325th Glider Infantry, which was not a volunteer outfit. And at that time, even though they were airborne, they did not receive the hazardous pay that the paratroopers received, nor did they receive any wings or paratroop uniform. After I was assigned to Company F, since I had qualified during basic training as an expert on the 30 caliber light air-cooled machine gun, I was assigned as a machine gunner to Company F of the 2nd Battalion, where I met Sam Payne, who was soon to be my best friend and who was the last one to see me at the crossroads in Belgium. We began training and had glider flights and learned how to load and unload the gliders and how to get out of them. In late May, the end of May, as a matter of fact, it was on May 29, 1944, the 325th was moved out of Scraptoff. That's a little village just outside of Leicester, England, to airfields closer to the southern coast of England. The 2nd Battalion went to an airfield near Uppertree. People of Leicester seemed to realize that something was up, because when we left Scraptoff by truck, small groups of people gathered along the roads, waving and openly weeping. They went into Normandy on D+1, since there were not enough tow planes to take in the troopers on D-Day, and we had to wait for the tow planes to come back to beaches. We were advised that we were going to be into Normandy for 3 to 7 days and carried rations for that period. However, we were not relieved for 33 days, and as with all your airborne units in World War II, replacements were not made while the outfit was still in combat. The 2nd Battalion, most of the 2nd Battalion, went into Normandy in British Horsa gliders, not the American CG-4A, which is an American glider with a small steel frame covered by canvas. The Horsa glider is a plywood and could hold twice as many as the American glider. Although it was a more dangerous glider. It was almost as big as a tow plane and was made of plywood, so that when many of the Horsa gliders landed in Normandy, they hit either the Rommel asparagus, which was poles that Field Marshal Rommel had installed in between the hedgerows, or in the hedgerows themselves. And when they struck, a good many of them splintered, wounding a lot of the men inside with pieces of plywood that broke apart and penetrated the bodies of the troopers. After landing, the first big assignment for 2nd Battalion was the taking of a town known as Laham. Our initial landing zone was just south of St. Mary-Gallice, which was the first French town liberated by the airborne at 4 a.m. on the morning of June 6, D-Day itself. The 325 had been divided into two groups. One was for the 1st Battalion, which was called Mission Galveston, and the 2nd and 3rd Battalions, which was Mission Hackensack. All units, of course, left up to Reed for Normandy. The first large battle for the 2nd Battalion was that to take a town called Laham. The attack on the town commenced on June 9th, 44 at approximately 6:30 a.m. It began with cover fire from the 60-millimeter mortars of the regiment and the light machine guns, one of which was mine. Germans responded with their own mortars and intense small arm fire, causing many casualties in the various companies. On the second day, the 2nd Battalion set up a perimeter defense and sent out probes towards the village of Laham. Suffered great casualties. On June the 11th, General Ridgway, the commanding general of the 82nd Airborne, ordered Captain Galt of Company F to move his company forward, and the attack started approximately 10:30 in the morning. As the village of Laham appeared in the distance, we could see some soldiers who were retreating, German soldiers who were retreating towards the village, and we came across some fresh horse droppings indicating that a German artillery unit had been withdrawn very shortly before we arrived on the scene. The attack went forward, and that started in the late afternoon. We had about 500 yards to get into the village. When we finally made there, we took prisoners, secured the village, and that was done by 2,000. We also, Company F also secured a bridge over the Murradet River at that time, and the 2nd Battalion had suffered many casualties in addition to those who were lost on the landing, which were estimated later to be approximately 40%. After taking the village of Ham, the 2nd Battalion was engaged in many other battles, including helping both the 1st and 3rd Battalions with their objects, which was the Fear Causeway, the attack of which was in fact pushed and led by both Generals Ridgway and Gavin, and the 1st Battalion had to take another crossing over the Meredith River with the assistance of the 2nd Battalion. In any event, the 325 was actively engaged for a period of 33 days without any relief or replacements. The 325 was returned to Scraptoff, where we received replacements and began training again in both the Horsa glider and the American glider. The size of rifle companies, however, were increased, and on September the 11th of 1944, the regiment was restricted to Scraptoff, and on September 15th, we departed for an airfield with takeoff duty, or takeoff scheduled for September the 19th, 1944. Paratroops were to go in on September the 17th, and our destination was Nijmegen, Holland. The object of this was Operation Market Garden with the 82nd Division to secure the bridges at Grave and Nijmegen. In this instance, the entire 325th Regiment did go into combat with the American glider, the C-64A. This was only a 15-man glider, and going into Holland, the Air Force did not have sufficient pilots, and therefore one of the riflemen was selected in each glider to be instructed by the pilot as he rode in the co-pilot seat. The weather became so bad that the actual takeoff did not occur until September the 23rd, 1944. After takeoff, there was approximately a 4-hour glider ride to the landing zone, which was located in Groesbeek, Holland, just outside of Nijmegen. Unfortunately, both tow planes and gliders were shot out of the sky, and of the approximately 260 gliders that left England, only 200 landed at the landing zone itself. Another approximately 50 landed way short of the landing zone, and the rest of the gliders were unaccounted for. My own glider crash landed in the soft dirt from the rain and went nose down, but we were able to get out of the glider and were subjected to small arms fire immediately. One of the most important things, however, was that within 10 minutes of our landing, the Dutch underground was by our sides wearing their orange armbands and advising us of places where the Germans were dug in and where they felt we could proceed without too much opposition. During that period of time, we were near the Kierberg Woods, which is right on the German border, and I was advised by my captain to take my machine gun up to a ridge. When I arrived there with my crew and gun, there were approximately 8 or 9 other machine guns lined up on that ridge, and we were told that there was going to be an artillery barrage on the woods, and that when and if any Germans came out, we were to shoot them. I had to ask what we would do if they came out under a white flag, and was asked if I didn't understand English. When they came out, we were to shoot them. And at the end of the day, there was over 200 Germans who never made it back into the woods because of those orders. We stayed in Holland and were assigned to various areas in order to accomplish the missions of getting and holding the bridges at both Grave and Nijmegen. During that period of time, the British had passed through the 101st Division, which was south of us, and had begun passing through our 2 bridges when everything came to a halt because of the 3rd bridge at Arnhem, which the British were unable to take for many, many bad military reasons. But in any event, the 82nd and the 325 were assigned to protect the tanks and troops from the British and Canadian who were on the roads. And at one point, I was sent back to ask them if they would fire and assist us with some artillery, because we were out on the perimeter and the Germans were cutting us down, and we were not getting replacements. The Canadian commander apologized, but said they were under orders not to waste ammunition. They couldn't help us. We went into Holland, being advised that we would be in there from 7 to 10 days, and 64 days later, we were withdrawn from Holland and relieved by Canadian troops and sent to a new base in Cesson, France, which is a small village just outside of Reims, France. We got back there in time for Thanksgiving dinner and were into rest and relaxation, but we had not received any replacements until the night of December 16th, 1944. The 325th Regiment was giving a show for its troops, and a major walked out on the stage about 10 o'clock at night to tell us to report back to the tents, draw our ammunition, that we were going up to the front because the Germans had broken through into Belgium in a battle which was ultimately called the Battle of the Bulge. Since the 82nd left first in trucks, we were placed in flatbed trucks with high sides. I mounted my machine gun on top of the cab of the truck, and our orders were to go up into the bulge behind the Pennsylvania 28th Division and the 106th Infantry Division, which was a brand new infantry division from the United States, and dig in and let them withdraw, and we would become the first line of defense. Initially, the 82nd was to go into Bastogne, but just before we got there, the entire convoy was stopped, and the 82nd was routed into the town of Werbermatt, and the 101st
Division, which was behind us, was then assigned to stay in Bastogne. We got up there about the 18th or 19th of December, and on the 19th, my company was assigned to go to a crossroad called the Baraque de Fracture. To get there, we were walked in a small stream. The water was at least ankle deep, and at times knee deep for at least 8 hours, but we finally got onto the crossroads, and we had orders to hold it at all costs. We went up there with about 70 men because we had not as yet received replacements from the time we spent in Holland, and we spread out over that crossroad, and as long as we held it, the Germans could not bring their infantry up to join into the battle. Although we were under heavy artillery fire, my gun in particular, since I had the only one that was functioning at the time, and all of the weapons seemed to be aimed at us. But in any event, on the 22nd, Captain Woodruff received a call from General Gavin that he was to bring out the officers and all of the walking wounded, and the rest of us were to be left to hold that crossroad at all costs. On the afternoon of December the 23rd, the Germans gave a lot of small arm fires, and suddenly I was able to see the barrel of an 88 come out of the woods attached to a Tiger Royal tank. In all, there were a total of 6 tanks there. I began to fire at the first tank. Every 5th bullet in my belt was a tracer, and I could see the tracer bullets bouncing off the turret of the tank, but doing no damage at all. And the tank started out, and they began to squish the men that were in split trenches with the treads of the tank. We were not in foxholes because the ground was frozen and you couldn't dig down that deeply. In addition, of course, we were still in a dark uniform. No one had brought up the white capes that the Germans themselves were able to use. We got down to about 9 men. My second gunner, who, as I said, became my best friend, said to me, "Matt, I'm too scared to stay." And I said, "Sam, I'm too scared to run." And he took off, and I covered him with the machine gun until he got in the woods. And the rest of us, I asked, "How do you want to die? Do you want to die and get shot, or do you want to get squished?" And all decided we'd be better off getting shot very quickly. However, the Germans decided to interrogate us, but before they did that, they went around over the crossroad and hit or kicked each of the men that were lying there, and if anyone gave any signs of life, they were shot immediately in the head. After the 9 of us were captured, we were separated rather, and I was interrogated in the dungeon of one of the castles there. The German interrogator spoke perfect English, and when he asked me questions, I gave him my name, rank, and serial number, and he told me who my captain was, that he had left us the day before. He knew more about the company than I did at the time. I guess I was too scared to remember anything. In any event, after interrogation, they marched a group of us, none of them were 325 men, through parts of Germany, including Cologne, and ultimately put us into some 40 and 8 boxcars where we rode several days, freezing. We were packed in so tight you could not sit down. We were shoulder to shoulder. If you had to go to the bathroom, you just went. We finally arrived in the German town of Limburg, having been strafed once by American planes. As they let us out of the boxcars, 2 men fell on the floor. They were dead. No one knows how long they were dead, or whether they died from the strafing, or whether they just died from other conditions. In any event, we were admitted into Stalag 12A. There was more interrogations. For the first time, I had a shower since probably December 15th. And after the shower, we were issued no new clothes. I can tell you the first night that of the boxcars that were there, about 200 were placed in one barracks. There was one toilet and 200 men had dysentery. And the Germans had said if anybody opened the door, all would be shot. So it was a rather hellish night, the first night in the Stalag. Fortunately for me, and some of the other men, none of whom were airborne, other than some of whom were Air Force men, were then taken to a work detail in a town above Berlin near the North Sea, where we were to work in the fields. Our job was, or in the forest, our job was to cut down trees, because that's all that the Germans had for fuel. When springtime came, we began to plant trees again in the same area where we had cut them down. We had little or no food in that work detail. In the morning, we got either ersatz tea or ersatz coffee. If we had tea in the morning, we got coffee at night. At lunchtime, we were given a dip of what they called kartoffel soup or potato soup, which was made of peelings and water. In the 4.5, 5 months that I spent in that camp, I lost 66 pounds. In April, American planes flew over and dropped leaflets indicating that President Roosevelt had died, but that would not affect the war effort, and that the American troops would continue on until complete victory. About the same time, we were hearing jet airplanes. We were apparently close to a jet factory, which was experimental, and the first sound of a jet in the air scared all of us. But in any event, shortly thereafter, we began to hear the Russian artillery, and we were able to convince our German guards that they would be better off as American prisoners rather than Russian prisoners, since all of them had been wounded on the Russian front. They agreed and turned over all of the weapons and ammunition to us. I received a pistol with the ammunition, since a pistol had been my personal weapon in addition to the machine gun. And we let the guards keep their rifles, because they had to walk us towards the American lines through German towns, and the population of those towns were not too happy with Americans anyhow, because at that time planes were bombing them night and day, and they had a lot of rubble and as we went through the towns, they picked up the rubble and threw it at us, but the guards kept them off of us and found us barns to sleep in. On May 4th, we arrived in the German town of Schwerin on the Russian side of the Elbe. The American 8th Division had crossed the Elbe. We turned the prisoners over to the American 8th, and they took us in, gave us showers, deloused us, and issued new uniforms to us. And subsequently, because of loss of weight and other conditions, I was assigned to a field hospital in Normandy, France, called Camp Lucky Strike, where they watched my diet and tried to get some weight back on me and treated me. And finally, in June, I was told that I was able to go home. I was sent to Le Havre, France, and all the troops began to board a Liberty ship. As you go up the gangplank, there is a lieutenant and a sergeant, and the sergeant would call out parks, and you would answer Matthew W. 12/21/1879. He looked at me and he says, "What's your problem, soldier?" I said, "I don't have any, sir. I'm going home." He said, "Yes, you have. Stand aside." So I stood aside. The doctor was called, and he diagnosed me as having the measles. So I was taken out of line and sent to another field hospital called Camp Chesterfield, where I was placed in the isolation ward. Ultimately, my measles went away. I was again told I was going home. And as I approached the gangplank, I could feel my face and throat beginning to swell, and I realized that my friend in the field hospital had the mumps and that I was probably getting them. So I put my duffel bag on my right shoulder between the officer and the sergeant. When they called my name, I answered affirmatively, was allowed on board ship, but I did not go below where I was assigned. I waited on deck until the ship cleared the harbor, and then I reported to sickbay and was diagnosed with the mumps. The doctor there said, "Well, we don't have any isolation ward," but he ultimately moved the colonel who was in charge of the troops returning out of his room, and they made that an isolation ward, and I spent 14 days in there before we arrived home at Norfolk, Virginia, where I was greeted by German prisoners, very nice, clean uniforms, looking very healthy, which disturbed me to no end. In any event, I finally arrived home to New Jersey on July the 12th, 1945. I had a 30-day leave, and then I was sent to Lake Placid, New York, for some R&R for 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, and without warning, a group of us was sent by train to Camp Shelby, Mississippi. Where the captain advised us that we were going to be cadre to a new division that was being formed to invade Japan. I told the captain, "No, sir, I've been there and I've done that, and I'm a former prisoner, as are all of us." And he said, "What, you're all ex-prisoners?" And I said, "Yes, sir." So he said, "We'll go back to your barracks and I'll get in contact with you." 2 days later, he came and he told me I was assigned to the Transportation Corps at Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, where my job was to meet the troop trips that were, the troop ships that were then returning from Europe. And I was privileged to meet one of the troop ships that brought back several regiments of the 82nd Airborne before they performed their march down Broadway, led by General Slim Jim Gavin. In any event, I was discharged from the Army on November the 19th, 1945. I applied for college. Uncle Sam, under the GI Bill, was going to pay for 4 years of college. So I thought I would apply at one of the best, and I applied at the University of Pennsylvania. Had an interview with the then controller. After small talk, he said to me, "Tell me, Mr. Parks, how many of your family graduated from Penn?" And I said, "Sir, I'm the first one to graduate from high school." Whereupon he said, "Well, thank you very much. This interview is over." I let loose a few choice words and then walked across town in Philadelphia to Temple University, who accepted me immediately. And I spent 4 years in undergrad and 3 years in law school. My last graduation there being 1943. While we were both still in junior high, we were married June 19th of 1948. While I was still in college, as a result of that union, we had 2 children, Gary, and Marilyn, who together have given us a total of 5 grandchildren. 3 are natural, 3 are instant, since Gary's wife had previously been married. I know I'm supposed to end this with a dedication, and I dedicate this whole thing to my family, and more particularly to the grandchildren. My granddaughter has been after me for years to write this down, and I never even talked about it until 50th anniversary of D-Day, when my grandson asked me if I would appear in his school to talk to the classes about D-Day. My experience during the war, I would not take $1 million for now, but I would not do it again. At the time, it was the proper thing to do. The entire world was being run by companies or countries, Germany, Japan, and we would not have a world we have today. You'll have to excuse me if a lot of young men give the ultimate sacrifice there's nothing more to say.
Before you ask questions, I'm going to answer one that you raised. You wanted to know, how did the Germans get all of that armor up without any problems? From the 17th of December, 1944, until the 24th, no bombing raids were possible because a massive storm front came in that brought in the fog and whatnot. So we practiced every day, and we could never get going. So once the weather turned clear again, well, we just went in, and day after day after day, we just bombed the access to the bulge and so forth. So now, any questions?
When they showed you, Mike.
You got it?
You'll notice one thing. This is what was causing all the problems. When they told us to get ready to go up to the bulge, they gave us the great advice: don't take your overcoats, don't take anything, just get up there, we'll supply you in line. So you saw a lot of men up there wearing I fortunately had 2 pair of long johns on and a sweater, plus the outer uniform. But the powers that be said, don't take it, we'll supply you in line. The first thing we see, we're in dark uniforms, in the snow, standing out like sore thumbs, and the Germans got their nice white capes on. Now, I have some pictures at home. I had a blanket, because I liberated that blanket from a German who couldn't argue with me anymore. But it had more lice on it than I got in prison camp. But you did what you had to do. I mean, when we got to that crossroad, we had been in water from ankle deep to knee deep for 8 hours. And as good as waterproof as our jump boots were, they weren't that good, and sometimes it was over the jump boot and down inside of it. So the men who remained, if I have to say so myself, did one hell of a job. They were suffering from frostbite, losing their toes, losing their fingers, losing everything, but they had a job to do, and they did it. And you'll notice, too, in D-Day, the 325 went in on regular infantry combat clothes, with the buckle boots and everything. After that, they finally decided that glider men were airborne, and they gave us the jump boots and they gave us the jump uniforms, and they were a hell of a lot better, I can tell you that. Yes, sir.
Any questions? I'm going to bring the mic to you, so wait until I come there. Here.
I don't know if you're aware that in Nijmegen there's a museum which depicts that whole battle that you were in. There's also military cemeteries. It's done very nicely, and we visited there 2 years ago, and it was very moving because there was a gentleman, I guess he's probably about 70 now, but he was 15 years old at the time, and he heard a lot of motors, and he ran out into the field. And he said he saw these giant white angels coming down out of the sky. He was very, very moved, even 50 years later, talking about it.
As I said in the narrative, I didn't know what they were going to do with that narrative, by the way. A gentleman called me, said, I'm going to ask you questions, you answer, and that's it. So I did. They edited him out and just put my words in there. But I was back for the 55th anniversary, and I'm signed up to go back for the 60th this year, and I know what you're talking about. I've been to those museums. They are absolutely fabulous. I hear you, sir. People in Holland and the people...
Just turn your volume up.
Turn it up. The people in Holland and Belgium still think we're the white angels, and they treat us like that. Unfortunately, and if there are any French people here, I apologize, but when I go back to France, I still get the same thing. You liberated us yesterday, what are you still doing here today? But Holland and Belgium was, as I said in the narrative here, we weren't on the ground 10 minutes in Holland till women, men, children were out being shot at with us, telling us where the Germans were, where the big concentrations of the Germans were and a way we would get around behind them or something like that to help us. It was just fabulous.
Next question.
There's a gentleman
Here.
back there.
Why, Matthew, as an aside,
325, man.
no, I'm a 321st Glider Artillery, 101st.
I know.
But Walter Cronkite jumped with us in Holland.
I know he did.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know that. That's
See?
quite interesting.
What you see on television today doesn't tell the whole story. The war correspondents were in the next foxhole. They were there with you, and we were happy to have them because they had food we couldn't get a hold of. And for those who smoked, they had cigarettes. I've never smoked a day in my life, so it didn't bother me. In fact, in German prison camp, you get a Red Cross parcel. You're supposed to get one a week. I got 3 in the 4.5 months. I would trade my cigarettes for what food they had in their parcel, because when you get a habit like smoking or whatever it is, they give up their food. They were all losing weight. I lost 66 pounds in that time, even trading for their food.
Why, in addition to that, as an airborne buddy of yours, I want to compliment you on a very well done story. It was just very complete and very well done, and I think it was great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.